This is New York City in all its glory. The city that never sleeps, aglow with lights throughout the night.
You can be 20 miles coming down the thruway, and when you get to a certain point and look up, you see that glow in the sky.
But what powers this awesome sight is often an afterthought.
I would say electricity is literally the lifeblood of New York City, right? I mean, it powers everything that you do, but people almost tend to take it for granted.
Keeping the lights on in this bustling metropolis requires coordination, constant maintenance, and quick thinking. New Yorkers demand billions of watts of electricity per day, substantially more than the city itself can produce.
1% of the state is using something on the order of 33% of the power.
The ever-present threat of climate change has caused both city and state to set some of the nation's most ambitious decarbonization goals. And now the race is on to change how this metropolis generates its power.
How do we transition this great city into a place that's fueled with renewables?
This is how New York City keeps the lights on.
The Niagara Power Project actually is one of the largest, is the largest generation source on our grid in New York State right now. So most of the renewable resources and energy resources in the state are upstate. Obviously, in New York State, the primary loads are downstate, New York City and Long Island, where the population centers are and a lot of manufacturing and other loads are.
This hydroelectric power plant provides the state 2.6 million kilowatts of electricity per year. It's one of the state's central station power plants, generating huge amounts of electricity far from where it's needed most. Electricity's journey begins here and at hundreds of other power plants across the state. Together, they make up the Eastern Interconnection, one of the two major electrical grids in North America. This plant is but one small piece of this vast machine.
We take water from the upper Niagara and we transport that through two conduits, 4.5 miles downriver. Water is very heavy, and water is quite powerful no matter what way it's stored. Once it's ponded in a lake, like Lake Erie in our case, in the upper Niagara River, we use the potential energy around that elevation to run the water down through some turbines, and those turbines will rotate.
The plant takes in 748,000 gallons of water each second, which spins its 25 turbines to generate clean electricity.
We use that rotation and that motion and mechanical energy and transfer that and create electrical energy from that. It goes to the grid, it follows the path of least resistance to the rest of the state and feeds the loads that are there. Everything that I just described is instantaneous. Every electron we generate is actually consumed almost in real time. The legacy of hydroelectric is almost impossible to measure the impact. We really learned that it's one of the cleanest ways to generate electricity.
While the upstate area might be the center of the system now, the modern electrical grid was born on the streets of lower Manhattan.
New York was right at the forefront of electricity. You know, our company, Con Edison, is named after Thomas Alva Edison. The power plant at Pearl Street was the first one that delivered power.
This was the site of Edison's Pearl Street station. There was two buildings. One was an iron foundry. I think the other was a soap factory. And again, he didn't have a big budget for this experimental plant. This is the cheapest real estate he could find.
Electricity was, at the time, a luxury, often relegated to those who could afford to build their own generators.
Instead of just going for one building, there are a lot of customers that he saw were out there, but they couldn't afford a power plant in their basement. So you put in a central power plant and sell the power in the manner of a utility, like just as you would with gas.
It was one of the most innovative and world-altering infrastructure projects. The plant originally powered 400 lamps at 82 locations, including the New York Times building.
This was steam engines cranking direct current generators. Power was fed out lines under the street, and then it was delivered to individual customers. They were called jumbos, named after a famous circus elephant. That's where they got the name Jumbo.
6 of these 27-ton machines were needed to light up just 1 square mile of New York City. When Thomas Edison pulled the switch at his downtown electrical plant on September 4th, 1882, he ignited the electrical age. By 1884, the Pearl Street station was serving 508 customers with 10,164 lamps. This station launched the modern electric company industry.
His invention of the light bulb and the appliances derived from it has often been ranked with the invention of the wheel as the most beneficial to mankind.
Edison's invention ignited a need for electricity, and what once existed in a bubble in lower Manhattan quickly spread. But Edison's plant used direct current and could not meet growing demands for electricity. His competitors, Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse, believed alternating current was the answer, and it eventually won out. Today, dozens of plants operate in or close to the city limits. Combined, they have the ability to generate most of the electricity the city needs each day.
New York City does actually have the capability to generate something on the order of 90% of our power in city. Believe it or not, all of them are fossil fuel driven, and some of them are 1970 vintage combustion turbines that are just not good, for the environment and for the air quality.
Most are concentrated in Astoria and Long Island City, and often near low-income neighborhoods. Ravenswood Generating Station has been powering New York City since 1963. The plant uses both fuel oil and natural gas to produce electricity and is the largest plant in the city limits, representing about 20% of the city's generation capacity.
Ravenswood is a vital facility for keeping the lights on in New York City during the depths of the winter when people are keeping their homes warm, or during the hottest days in the summer when people are trying to run their air conditioning.
When you work in a power plant in New York City, you tend to have a decent amount of pride. You look out over the lights at night and you say, this is what I do, this is part of it. And I believe that a lot of people in this industry feel that same way, that they feel that they're powering New York, and it's a good feeling.
The plant sits on the East River and features 4 massive 10-story generating units, the largest of which is colloquially called Big Alice. It's the largest single generator in the eastern United States and has the capacity to produce 1,000 megawatts of electricity.
What we're looking at here is the inside of the Ravenswood Unit 20 furnace. What's happening here is that the fuel is being combusted, it's being burned. Right? That chemical energy that's been locked inside of it is being released as thermal energy. If you see inside there, there's a series of tubes. They're filled with water. That water is collecting the heat and it's turning into steam. Very high pressure, high temperature steam collecting all that energy. All that energy will be transferred to the turbine, which will spin the generator. We'll see that in a minute. The steam that was generated over in the furnace that we just saw has been collected, and it's at a very high pressure right now. And it's going through a turbine here that's spinning around so it can spin a magnet. That's at the back end of this machine. From the outside, it doesn't look very exciting. But this machine right now is making about 180 megawatts. Again, enough for about 180,000 homes. The turbine is connected to the generator. The generator is making the electricity, and the electricity is being routed out to the switchyard to our south so that all the people of New York can enjoy the electricity that they need for their daily life.
These pieces of equipment remain among the most efficient power generators in the entire city because they were built very well, and we've maintained them very well. So they remain very efficient from both a cost and an environmental emissions perspective.
Ravenswood also features a number of smaller generators called peakers. They are about the size of an aircraft engine, start up much faster, and run during times of high demand. During the hottest days of the summer and coldest days of the winter, these are what New York relies on to keep running. But these units have received criticism for their emissions, and Ravenswood is one plant that is in the process of shutting them down.
We are the stewards of this facility, and we are responsible members of this community, which means that we need to be making responsible investments that respect our neighbors. To do that, we've shut down 14 out of our 17 peakers and are in the process of shutting down the remaining 3 by 2023.
Plummer has plans to convert the entirety of the plant to provide clean energy to New Yorkers. But for now, it is vital to powering New York.
New York City is a bit of a unique circumstance, and that is because the load demand is so high in really quite a confined geographic space. So the grid is really designed around understanding, the energy requirements of New York City. We're one state with one grid. So from Montauk to Buffalo, we have to think about the grid as a singular sort of device.
It's been described as the largest machine on the planet, right? So it's all the generators, all the switches, and all the transmission facilities that interconnect all of the customers on the entire Eastern Interconnection.
New York's electrical grid is managed from here. This massive control room at the New York System Operator in Rensselaer reads the pulse of New York's energy needs.
This is where the power system operators sit as we manage the grid on a daily basis. So 12-hour shifts. We have 7 operators here that are really what we call it keeping the lights on. I mean, it's about approximately 100,000 data points that are getting updated every 6 seconds. That data is being evaluated, goes into our systems that we're monitoring the reliability of the system. We're sending signals out every 6 seconds to all the generators across the state to manage where we expect them to be from a power output. So to balance that demand and supply, we're really making changes very, very frequently and monitoring as those changes happen across the system.
When you talk about managing the grid, it's really about making sure 2 things. Number one is that the electricity is transferred safely. We don't exceed the capabilities of these transmission systems to be able to manage that much electricity. And then also it's keeping everything in balance. Anybody turns on a light, a generator needs to go up a little bit, and anybody turns off a light, a generator needs to go down a little bit. So we manage the schedules in real time of those generators to make sure the system stays balanced.
A 2,300 square foot video wall laying out the entire New York State grid is the centerpiece of the operation.
So the way the board is set up is sort of geographically, but we do have Albany in the middle. So if we go to the west out towards Niagara, towards Buffalo, along the wall, we can kind of see that path going along there. If you follow the red all the way from Niagara out in the western part of the state, the large generators that are there, that backbone 345 system, which leads right into New York City.
Once electricity is made, it needs to be used instantaneously, no matter how far away it's generated.
NYSO is kind of like the orchestra, the maestro that kind of tells which generators to play and when. And then Con Edison, we own the transmission assets that they're coming in on for our service territory, and as well as operate the distribution system that gets that power to customers.
Consolidated Edison is one of the largest energy providers in the United States, and it's the final step of electricity's instantaneous journey to New Yorkers' outlets.
We're in the Manhattan Control Center, and this is where they oversee the distribution system in the borough of Manhattan. The power is typically generated far away from the load centers, and then it's transmitted. The last part of that is distributing it and getting it to our customers. So in Manhattan, our distribution feeders are typically 13,800 volts, and they deliver the power through the streets. Ultimately, there's one transformer that steps it down and gets it into their house. Power has to be dropped from 13,000 volts down to 120 volts for you to use it in your wall.
The Manhattan grid has 39 networks, or pockets of equipment feeding electricity to customers, all monitored here day and night for any disturbances. Con Ed operates the grid on what's called an N-2 design. It's a redundancy that allows Con Ed to maintain power even if they lose two components. But things do inevitably fail.
So on this board here, if you look to the left, that's called our distribution information system. And that shows you each of the networks, and then the green boxes are the feeders in that network. So there's anywhere from 8 to 24 feeders feeding particular networks. The few cases where a feeder's out, you'll see that the purple is marked there. And then the middle board shows us those 3 feeders that you see in purple. It shows us what the work status is on that. And we're very focused on getting all of those feeders back as quickly as we can.
As older plants like nuclear generating Indian Point are retired, generating enough power to meet New York's needs is an ever-present concern. Currently, New York State still relies heavily on fossil fuel resources. In 2020, 55% of the grid's resources came from zero-emission sources, while 43% of the grid ran off fossil fuels. When former Governor Andrew Cuomo signed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act in 2019, the state took on an ambitious challenge.
Let me say this, 1,700 megawatts of clean energy.
70% of electricity will be generated by renewables by 2030, and the state's electrical grid will be completely carbon-free by 2040. By 2050, New York State aims to achieve complete carbon neutrality across the state's economy. New York City has taken this challenge a step further and is requiring that new constructions have green roofs and buildings meet strict requirements. These climate goals are on the minds of the operators of many of New York City's fossil fuel generating stations.
2040 is coming up very quickly, and to be able to meet the goal of 100% renewables by 2040, we need all hands on deck. New York State can't meet its goals without New York City cleaning up. So our strategy has been to leverage our very large site to become this hub for connecting to wind and solar resources upstate to help keep the lights on with the same level of reliability that we have previously.
The proposed project is called the Catskills Renewable Connector. It's received praise from both the community and elected officials, but still awaits approval from the state.
So with just a few bundles of cable buried deep beneath the riverbed, we can move thousands of megawatts of power from upstate and from offshore wind into the site, reusing all of the electrical infrastructure that was originally built here to send out power from Big Alice and the rest of our fossil generating facilities. Society needs this type of transformation. Our hope is that we can be an example. We recognize that there's a dichotomy out there. There's a false narrative that says you can either keep the lights on cheaply or you can be clean and renewable. But I'm standing here on the biggest power plant in New York City telling you that you can do both.
Energy experts are racing to meet the state's decarbonization goals, but some are looking to smaller solutions to keep the lights on.
New York State has a goal of getting 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. New York has another goal of 6,000 megawatts of solar power by 2025, and they're already halfway there.
These projects promise power to more than 2.4 million New York homes. Increasingly, many are looking to produce their own electricity from clean, renewable sources.
A microgrid is a decentralized power plant. It's essentially just a smaller scale system that allows a business or any property to sort of operate as an island, and that they are able to function independently, keep their critical loads up and running, and be able to support their business even during a massive grid failure. Here, standing on the rooftop of Linda Tool, which is one of the businesses participating in our RISE NYC program, a $30 million program to fund resiliency technologies.
The program helps businesses that were devastated by Superstorm Sandy become more resilient to extreme weather.
This is the first one, and the wiring goes from here to that one, then the last two, and then they go to the inverters. These are photovoltaic cells, and they convert the sunlight into DC power, direct current, and the DC power goes to the inverters, and the inverters switch it over to AC, and then it flows into the power system. These are the inverters from the solar panels. This is the inverter from the CHP unit. They all come together into that control box, and then they send the AC power downstairs to the automatic transfer switch. So if the power goes out, the switch switch over to this system. And it basically runs his offices and his computers. This is not even close to the amount to run his machinery. You would need 5 times the size in order to do that.
Microgrids like these may not provide all the electricity a company needs, but can protect a home or business if the grid goes down.
So I think sort of independently operating from the grid is, in a way, greening the grid, in that we are freeing up some of the grid's capacity to focus on areas where we can't have something like this.
Modern life does not exist without electricity, and keeping the grid running is no easy task. It's a balancing act that will only get harder as New York moves away from fossil fuels.
So we're predicting the grid of the future is going to be more generators and smaller generators. So the challenge of scheduling them economically and making sure that they're all operating at the appropriate time so that we can balance that generation to that load, it's going to be a harder optimization problem to solve.
And as New York moves towards a greener future, new challenges will arise.
It's not really about just cleaning up the electric system, it's cleaning up the entire economy.
Part of reaching that 2050 goal of full decarbonization is getting the transportation industry to electrify, and that means electric vehicles.
This move toward electrification will increase New Yorkers' demand for electricity at the same time older plants are shutting down. As the deadline of a complete decarbonized grid approaches, New York is looking at new ways to generate and store electricity.
One resource that gets a lot of attention is hydrogen. So you can get a lot of energy from a relatively small amount of hydrogen. Battery technology is probably one of those highly kind of emergent technologies, but also extraordinarily high potential.
Energy storage is the holy grail to electricity, period. But then when you're using these resources that are incredibly green and awesome, but are intermittent, you need to have something storing that power when the sun's not shining and when the wind's not blowing.
From the early days, when lights first illuminated the streets of Manhattan, the city was forever changed.
If you look at a satellite photo and you look at New York City, it's obviously very much brighter than the rest of the states. The amount of electricity used in New York City reflects the vibrancy of the people in New York City.
Electricity is really one of those very base primary things that makes what we love to think of as our modern life and our quality of life happen.
It's about the ability to be able to continually provide reliable power under a variety of various circumstances. We need to be able to show up to help keep the lights on for New York City's $1.3 trillion economy. This facility is absolutely necessary today, but at the same time, it's absolutely necessary, the same level of urgency, to be able to create new clean energy sources that will take the place of this over time.